It was 5:42 a.m. when the alarm screamed into the silence of a small, dimly lit room. The city outside was still wrapped in the cold grip of dawn, but inside that single-bedroom apartment, the air was thick with the stale smell of last night's unfinished instant noodles and the quiet weight of unfulfilled dreams. On the narrow bed lay a young man named Daniel Hart, his eyes half open, staring at the cracked ceiling as if searching for answers that had been eluding him for years. He had once promised himself that life would not slip by unnoticed, that he would be someone, that his name would carry meaning. But somewhere along the way, laziness crept in like a slow, sweet poison, numbing his urgency, silencing his ambition. The days bled into each other. The calendar pages flipped silently. And before he knew it, years had passed, yet his life remained untouched, unproven, and painfully small, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power to change your life. No matter how lost you felt, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel from the heart. Your support is what helps stories like this reach someone who might be on the edge of giving up. Together, we can remind them that it's never too late. Daniel's laziness wasn't just a habit, it was a cage he had built for himself. He convinced himself he was resting when in reality he was avoiding. He avoided hard work, he avoided failure. But most of all, he avoided proving himself. There were dreams in his heart, traveling the world, learning new skills, starting his own business, but they were always for later, and later never came. He had been fired twice in the past year, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he lacked urgency. Deadlines were suggestions to him, effort was optional, and deep down he knew it. His friends had stopped inviting him to projects. His family had stopped asking about his goals. Even his reflection in the mirror had grown quieter, as if it no longer expected anything of him. One bitter winter morning, everything changed. Daniel's landlord knocked on his door, holding a final notice in his hand. He had exactly 2 weeks to clear his rent or vacate the apartment. The amount wasn't much by most standards, but for Daniel, who had no job and almost no savings, it might as well have been $1 million. At first he told himself he'd figure it out tomorrow. But tomorrow came and nothing happened. The notice lay on his desk like a silent countdown, each day slicing away his comfort. One evening, as the wind howled through the window frame, Daniel sat alone in darkness, staring at the eviction notice. For the first time in years, fear pierced through his fog of laziness. This wasn't about ambition anymore. This was about survival. That night, sleep refused to come. Memories began flooding his mind, of the boy he used to be, full of energy and ideas, of the young man who had promised his mother he would make her proud, of the version of himself who believed he could shape his destiny. Somewhere along the line, that version had vanished, replaced by someone who let opportunities rot before even touching them. But the thought of losing his home jolted something deep within him. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the faint voice of the man he used to be, whispering that this was his last chance to prove himself. The next morning, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He woke up before the sun and went for a walk with no headphones, no distractions, just the sound of his own footsteps. The streets were nearly empty, but the city was quietly waking. Shopkeepers were unlocking doors, delivery trucks were unloading goods, and the air was filled with the smell of fresh bread from the bakery at the corner. For the first time in years, he saw movement everywhere. And it hit him. The world runs on the backs of those who show up. Not the ones who wait for motivation. Not the ones who hide in comfort. But the ones who get up, even when it's hard. Daniel started small. He made a rule for himself. No matter what, he would take one action every day toward changing his life. On the first day, he applied for 5 jobs, even though fear whispered that he would be rejected. On the second, he cleaned his apartment, throwing away the trash that had been collecting for weeks. On the third, he started reading a book on discipline. It wasn't easy. His old habits fought back, pulling him toward his bed, his phone, the comfort of doing nothing. But each time he forced himself to remember the eviction notice on his desk and the quiet shame of the man he had become. Weeks passed. Slowly, his days began to change shape. he started to feel proud of small victories. He landed a part-time job at a cafe, the kind of work his old self would have called beneath him. But now he saw it differently, as a step forward, a test of his will. Waking up early, dealing with difficult customers, working on his feet for hours, these became proof that he could push past his laziness. And as the days turned into months, Daniel began to notice something strange. He didn't just feel less lazy. He felt alive. But the real test came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while closing the cafe, the manager approached him with an opportunity. There was a full-time position opening in the company's main office. It would mean longer hours, more responsibility, and the need to prove himself in a completely different environment. His old self would have declined immediately, afraid of the pressure. But this time, Daniel didn't hesitate. He said yes. The weeks that followed were brutal. The workload was heavy, the deadlines tight, and the expectations high. There were nights he stumbled home exhausted, his mind screaming for rest. But each time, he reminded himself why he started, because he refused to be the man who let life pass him by. And little by little, his colleagues began to notice. They saw the man who stayed late to get the job done. They saw the man who volunteered for difficult tasks. They saw someone who had learned the value of showing up. 1 year after that winter morning, when he had almost lost his home, Daniel stood in the company's annual meeting as his name was called. He had been promoted to project manager, a role he never thought he could earn. As he walked to the stage to accept the recognition, his mind traveled back to that cracked ceiling, that eviction notice, and the quiet shame he had once lived in. He realized something powerful. The biggest enemy he had ever faced wasn't the economy, bad luck, or even other people. It was his own laziness. And the moment he decided to kill it, everything changed. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that change is possible even when you feel too far gone, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps these stories find the people who need them most, people who might be just one choice away from turning their lives around. Before we end, I have one special request. Drop a comment below telling us the one dream you've been putting off and the first step you'll take today to make it real. Who knows, your story might inspire someone else to finally prove themselves.